So good afternoon. This is Adam Pincus of PincusCo Media. We are speaking today with a panel of real estate condo development experts to help us understand what the next year might look like in the new condominium sector as the city is absorbing the impacts of the pandemic and other impacts of the coronavirus. I'd like to introduce our panelists. First is Amit Doshi, the Senior Executive Managing Director at Meridian Capital Group. David Neveloff, a Principal at Alder Street Capital Partners. Jonathan Adelsberg, Partner at Herrick Feinstein. Chris Okada, President of Okada and Company. And Stephen Kliegerman, President of Halstead Development Marketing and Brown Harris Stevens Development Marketing. And I'd like to start in 1 minute with Stephen, but just so everyone knows, we're going to get started with this conversation, but if you have questions for our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to send them in. We'll be taking questions at the last about 10 or 15 minutes. So Stephen, I'd like to just ask you briefly, give an overview of sort of how you're talking to clients and other developers about this market.
Sure. Thank you, Adam, and thanks for having me today. Good to see everybody virtually. So, as we're talking to our development clients and their financial partners about the market, I think it's really important that we quickly take a look back to how the beginning of the year started out. The first quarter of 2020 in new development, both in Manhattan and Brooklyn, was actually trending in a very positive direction until obviously the middle of March, where the world came to a pause. So the first quarter of 2020, we saw a 44% increase in new development contracts signed in the first quarter of 2020 over the first quarter of 2019, and that includes the month of March. Total dollar volume in Manhattan was up 49% first quarter 2020 over first quarter 2019. And sales volume in total was up 30% first quarter 2020 over first quarter 2019 in Manhattan. The numbers in Brooklyn were similar, 27% increase in absorption quarter over quarter and a 16% increase in total dollar sales volume. So the good news was and is that coming into 2020, the residential new development world in New York City was trending in a very positive direction. Developers had softened prices somewhat, 8% overall in Manhattan, 3% in Brooklyn, and sales volume and total contract signs were up tremendously. Then the middle of March came and we went into a pause. Since then, total volume of new development sales are off approximately 80 to 90%, and that is very disappointing. The good news is deals are getting done. We're seeing a lot of demand in virtual tours. We're seeing a lot of demand by buyers preparing to enter back into the purchase market in the future. So what are we doing right now with our clients to prepare for that? Developers and firms like ours, Halstead and Brown Harris Stevens, have quickly modified our marketing tools to have virtual tours done in all of our sales offices, model apartments, turning renderings into virtual tours, setting up webinars and virtual open houses, and networking to each other to keep each other informed of what is available in the marketplace and what is happening in the marketplace. A number of incentives have also been implemented by many developers at Halstead Development Marketing. We have a number of developers that are offering things such as lower deposit requirements on execution of a purchase agreement. So instead of a buyer having to put down 10, 15, or 20%, they can put down as little as 5% at signing.
Let's talk about some of the other options later.
Sure.
I'd like to definitely get into that. No, I want to hear the overview. And so I guess, Jonathan, what are you, stepping back and what's your kind of view of what's happening right now?
I think the overall view is a lot of people on all sides of the playing field are sort of like a deer in a car's headlights at this moment in time, in the sense of, there's like a reality check of what in fact is going on. As Stephen indicated, from our volume of transactions, we were going into, from January through March, we were quite busy. We saw changes in the market, but our volume was steady. But since probably March 17th, the whole tenor of every discussion has changed. Obviously people have real concerns at different levels depending upon where they are in the project. If they were just about to put a shovel in the ground, obviously there's concerns whether their construction lender is going to come to the table. If you're half built, the question is whether your lender is going to continue funding your project, which we assume they will. And then if you're in the early stages of sales and development, the concern is how long can I sustain my debt service and other expenses? In anticipation, there may be a much longer period of time to unload these units, and uncertainty as to what the pricing is going to be.
Well, here, let's move into,
yeah.
like, what, where are you seeing pricing right now? Like when if someone's calling you, what are you hearing from developers about, or from developers trying to talk to their lenders, that kind of thing?
Well, what's happening right now is, as I started saying, I think the shock factor is still in effect. And until the shock, what's going to diminish the shock factor is a degree of certainty of the direction of the virus and how the market's going to respond to the direction of the virus. So what's happening is it's very difficult to, for instance, to negotiate with your lender at this moment in time for something other than a deferral for the next few months, because you don't know if you're going to negotiate some type of forgiveness or some type of restructuring on your underlying debt and various parcels of the capital stack and what have you. You have to have an appreciation as to what the ultimate value is of the asset you're talking about. And I'm not pointing the fingers or anything, but assuming, and even best, if your $100 million project is now worth $1 million, that's one discussion. If your project is now $90 million, that's another project. And if it's $50 million, that's another discussion. So before anyone can ultimately discuss.
Let me just interrupt for a second. So just go around and talk. So Chris, like, are you getting a sense of where, like, any sort of absolutes in terms of pricing, or something that was offered at this price is now, like, where are you seeing?
Yeah, I would say that, speaking to developers that have condo projects, really the conversation is twofold. It's in the capital markets, you have to have open communications with the lenders first. And then the lenders are starting to get itchy about about what's on their balance sheet, piece by piece. Condo project by condo project, each one, how much have they sold? They're 20% sold, but they're completed. They're 50% under construction, just like Jonathan had mentioned. So, starting from the banks, if they're willing to work with the developer, that will, give them relief, just for time purposes. And developers themselves are obviously, it really comes down to different disposition strategies that they currently have. But ultimately, just like Stephen had mentioned with the virtual tours, you got to find out what your strategy is and then try to get foot traffic. But as Jonathan had mentioned, some buyers and renters in general are sort of stuck figuring out what they're going to do. Are they going to move to Long Island? Do they still want to be in New York City? Do they, what's going on with their job security? What's going on with schools? So people are dealing with their familial situations at home first and trying to find out a secure ground, what that looks like, because unfortunately the entire chain from bank to developer to the end buyer is all disrupted at this present time. and there's really no solid foundation. And this is not only for condos, for every asset class here in New York City. But certainly, I think, developers themselves, as far as giving discounts, there's 100% rent to own strategies currently. There are seller incentives of, we'll pay 10 years of common charges, we'll pay 10 years of tax, just, give us, but ultimately give us an offer. And I think, you had mentioned before about the bulk, and that's a whole new world and a whole strategy, but it's definitely one of 4 or 5 disposition strategies, or just financial survivorship strategies that a developer can implement. But really, everyone's on hold, on pause. Everyone has the PPP. Everyone has some forbearance. The question ultimately becomes, what happens after, the end of July? What happens in August? Can we get an extension? What are banks going to do? They have to clean up their balance sheets, and it's an ecosystem, and it all starts with the banks, and it ends with what are families doing, or what are purchasers doing.
I'd like to ask Amit if you can describe like a calls that you're getting from investors that are looking to buy into the market right now.
Adam, first of all, thank you for getting this panel on. We appreciate it. This is a topic that a lot of us have different opinions, but I think they all converge on to one thing: what is going to really happen in the New York City market. So just talking from the perspective of investors coming in, yes, we are getting calls. We are getting numerous interest at numerous levels. They're all looking to see, is New York City so disrupted that the developers are basically handing over the keys? And I hate to say this, but right now, none of that stuff is happening. I mean, if I am seeing discounted pricing, Chris talked about condo bulk sales being a different market. That's where I would come in that space, or Meridian would come in. And I'm basically seeing maybe from 0% to 5% discounting if you're going to end up buying bulk condos from a developer. Right now, the developers are working it out with the senior lenders, working it out with the mezzanine lenders. And again, they got to burn through their reserves. There are lots and lots of lenders who are willing to work. These are very uncertain times, and certainly no one knows what 3 months down the horizon it's going to look like. But one thing is for sure, banks are willing to work with them, and I think Jonathan can probably talk more about that from the legal perspective. But I find until you don't burn through reserves, remember, most developers have between 40 and 45% equity going into the deal. That's what I've been told by guys like Drew Enderman downtown and Morris Potash. These are not the things that people are going to walk away from it. Everything gets affected for a developer, whether it's a promote, whether it's a reputation, whether it's pizza stuff. So I don't see equity buyers coming in who want to write a check for 10 or 20 or $100 million. They're not just, they're looking for 2x times returns, maybe 20% at a minimum. Market developers are not offering that right now, Chris. I mean, Adam.
David, I wanted to ask back sort of the same kind of question to Amit, but is when you're getting phone calls, what are the kind of the phone calls that you're hearing from if someone's trying to offer you a possible sale?
So I think it would vary, but in general, someone reaching out that there's an opportunity on a particular building where, the sponsor wants to have a conversation, when it's a realization that, things are not as good as they were 90 days ago. And they would either be looking to unload a block of units, or they're looking for equity for a recap. I agree with some of the earlier points, right? We have very little price discovery. And I don't think that the discounts are that which would at this time qualify as distressed sales, but that's a relative term. So I think that the deals out there are better in some cases than they would have been 90 days ago. But I also agree that they're probably not at the point where you're going to be comfortable getting, they're not at the price at which you could comfortably underwrite a 20% return or a 2x multiple. Not that that has to be the target, but there are deals out there, but I think we're really early in this process of kind of dealing with the oversupply of condominium units in New York.
I would like to get into kind of a conversation from the point of view of a developer, and start with Jonathan, asking how, when you are getting calls from developers, and what are you telling them, and then how are they contacting other people, sort of the cascade.
So let me just begin with a few legal concepts that everyone should be sensitive to in this unique market that we're in. Unlike normal foreclosures on transactions, whether it's an apartment, a rental building, or a office building, or even a shopping center, when a potential foreclosure and default under a condominium project, there are a few additional parties that are involved. You have the New York State Attorney General's office, which is a significant player in all of this. You have perhaps a condo board and existing owners. So there's a whole group of people that need to be brought into consideration when you're making some drastic moves in this area. An event of default by a lender under a condominium project is something which requires immediate disclosure. You're required to file an amendment on your condominium declaration. And so lenders are very, very careful before they would ever issue any form of default notice to their borrowers. It's really forces you to continue dancing at the wedding together. So with that said, if there's a lot of background discussions between your lenders and your developers in terms of how, there's sort of, to a great extent, there's a mutuality of interest to resolve this in a beneficial way. Now, that's basically on the assumption that you're dealing with an institutional lender that carries itself a bit differently from a private lender who might be a loan-to-own type of person. But for the purposes of this discussion, let's go down that path. Once again, it's very hard to determine how much more equity you will need to put into a project, because it's sort of a bit difficult to ascertain what your additional expenses are going to be. There's still a moratorium on construction, and obviously any moratorium and delay in construction results in additional costs. And in doing so, until you know when construction is going to come back to normal, and even if the moratorium is lifted on not specialized construction relating to healthcare or schools or something to that effect, you're still going to have a compromised workforce constructing your building. So to a certain extent, you have to establish how much longer it's going to take you to complete a project, and how much more cash will you need to put into that project. And that's very much part of the discussion between your lender and your developer.
And how does that work out? Like, do you have borrowers calling right now asking you what they should do? Talk to the lender.
Look, we have our lender clients that are calling us of what to do. We have our borrower clients or what to do. We have condo boards that are calling us what to do. We have everybody calling in every direction as to what to do. But going down to until the storm blows out over the Atlantic, really the best thing you really can do is sort of, and I don't mean to say this in a slang type of way, but there is a need at this point sort of to kick the bucket for the next 2 or 3 months to see a level of stabilization. And I don't mean stabilization in the market. I mean stabilization, understanding when people can go back to work, when construction can resume, when people are going to start seeing sales again. Just an appreciation of some level of normalcy so businesses can start transacting again. Right now, we're it's a euphemism calling it a pause. It's an absolute freeze of any real economic activity. So
I'd like to ask Stephen, like, where are you in terms of your with the clients calling in and asking, I guess, I was right now from the point of view of a developer, what are their options right now? What are you telling them?
Well, as Jonathan had mentioned and Christopher and Amit had mentioned, it's a lot of wait and see right now. Thankfully, most of our projects were pretty well sold prior to COVID, so we might be in a little bit better position than some. But
Well,
as
just,
we anal-
just
but in
something
general,
that does
yeah,
need work.
as we analyze the market, you don't want to overreact, right? And you don't want to panic. Okay, this is a moment in time. Things will get worse before they get better, and that is the truth. Because as we start to come back to work, we're going to see just how many people come back to work. There was an article in the New York Times yesterday about a number of large companies telling their workers to stay home for the remainder of 2020. That's going to have an economic impact on the entire city. This is not a real estate problem.
But Stephen, just what are you counseling? What are some of the suggestions you're giving?
Right. So what we're telling our clients is be mindful of your debt, make deals that make sense. If someone's coming, if pre-COVID, your typical negotiability was 5 or 6% off ask, right now, the average that we're seeing is about 12% off ask. If you're getting an offer within 10% off ask, you should be considering it. You should make sure that you have all the tools that I started to talk about earlier to market your property. You should make sure that your sales team is prepared and really well suited to sell in a different environment for the rest of the year. Because even when we come back from the stay-at-home notice, people aren't going to be running out to see things. And frankly, you don't want them running out to see things. It's going to start with a virtual tour. Then there will be an in-person showing. It's going to take more time. And also we have to watch what's going on in the suburbs. Okay, we have to watch how the rental market in Westchester and Southern Connecticut and Northern New Jersey and the Hamptons is taking off. Because if we're really seeing the flight that people are talking about, well, that's going to have an impact on the market, and it's different segments to the market. Right now, below $2 million, we're still seeing a lot of activity. Over $5 million, activity has slowed down. And that's where you're seeing the greater negotiability as well.
And David, if you were, I don't know if this might be a little tricky, but if putting yourself in the position of a developer, or I guess what are your thoughts on if a building has a lot of amenity space? There's a question of whether that space will have to be converted. People won't want amenity space. It's not as valuable today. Do you have thoughts on like what a developer should do to try to reconfigure going forward?
Look, I personally think that's, I probably would not make significant changes other than probably putting in some better cleaning and better separation between, different machines. But I mean, I think that most of us on this panel would think that, hopefully a year from now or 18 months from now, or hopefully sooner, COVID is not, it might exist, but it's not existing to the point that it is today. So these buildings will still need gyms, and they'll still need their amenity space. You just might, end up creating more space between them.
Mm-hmm.
Adam, I just want to point out, Neveloff made a great point. The bottom line is, in today's world, this bigger buildings, whether they have 5 elevators in a 200-unit condo project, most people will not want to get on the elevators with other people. They may not want to use the swimming pool. They may not want to use other gyms facilities. At the end of the day, in today's world, just between $1.50 to $2 a square foot, these amenities are costing people. And I think if the market opened up today, most people who are not comfortable going in these common spaces may or using these amenities, whether it's a swimming pool or a theater in the building, may shy away from that. They may say, why don't we get a slightly bigger apartment instead of paying for this amenities? But amenities are a must, and there's no way a developer is going to sit there and re-engineer this space for something else. It's not going to work. Neveloff is correct on that.
I agree, and I think what people will see is they'll see the amenities as a future value in a new home, but not necessarily the present value because they won't be using it short term. I also think there might be an opportunity for smaller buildings with less amenities right now to market themselves as being boutique and less trafficked than larger buildings, which may be attractive right now.
Excellent point.
Stephen, I wanted to ask about when developers change brokers. Like, I guess you see it from the, I guess, either
Probably
side.
hates this question right now.
Happens all the time.
I'm
When-
going to leave the meeting now.
When does it happen, and what do you do to?
You know, when does it happen? It typically happens. It typically happens, you know, when you have an event, when sales are slow, or sometimes when the sales team's just been on the project for a long time and the developer thinks they have deal fatigue. I think right now, unfortunately, the baby will get thrown out a little bit with the bathwater on some projects right now where, you know, my competitors are doing a reasonably good job given the circumstances. But I will say, you know, I've watched, there's a whole range of what's going on online right now, right? And some firms, I think we are doing a really good job of it. I think some of my competitors are doing a good job of it, of virtual tours and virtual appointments, and others aren't. And I think this is actually an opportunity for a developer to really see firsthand what their marketing team is capable of and evaluating them as a voyeur versus just looking at reports every week. And I think you're going to see a lot of changing hands because developers are actually seeing which marketing teams are really standing out in a crisis and which aren't. But I think the baby will get thrown out with the bathwater. I think there'll be a lot of switching of hands of marketing teams, and the new marketing team coming in is going to have a challenge to change the messaging for that building. As Amit was saying, if you're a building that was banking on your amenities, you might not be banking on the marketing of your amenities for the next 6 months. You have to change your tune to maybe it's the neighborhood, maybe it's convenience to parks and open spaces, maybe it's the fact that the building has a lot of outdoor space, but you're going to have to change your marketing message.
Jonathan, this is kind of a switching to another part of this process, but you've got the owners, you've got their lenders, and then you've got some owners who might want to dump one project and buy another project. Are you seeing that kind of thing?
Well, look, nothing surprises me among my colleagues and friends in the real estate market. So I mean, for everybody who's listening, you know, I'm not speaking to anybody individually among my friends, but there are those who are calling you in the morning and telling you, okay, what am I going to do? And then in the afternoon, they tell me, I hear this off-market deal where the person's really in trouble and I want to sweep in and either put some rescue capital in or find a way to negotiate with a lender and buy the debt. I think that there's so many things that are happening in the market right now that we're seeing. Are you seeing real actions and real deals being cut? No, but are there people who are putting together groups to come in with the expectation that there are going to be a lot of debt portfolios on the market, individual debts that are going to be sold off, coming into people who need capital in their transaction and trying to get creative? We see a lot of people that are knocking on our door looking for, you know, in a discreet, sensitive type of way. I'm not talking about people who are coming in as sharks and as vultures to take advantage of the situation, but recognizing that there will be people that will lose their projects. There will be people that will come in and provide credit enhancement to their lenders going forward. And there'll be a lot of creative plays that are going on. If you look at the history of past, you know, recessions, that's sort of been the play. I mean, it's part of the cycle of life within real estate. And we were living for a period that we thought that there was an invincibility about the New York market. I still believe that the New York market is going to come back, but there's going to be a lot of pain and a lot of creative transactions that start to emerge. It's a little bit early to start seeing it, but are people getting ready for it? Absolutely.
Chris, I wanted to ask you, just to follow on that, is when we were talking the other day about a project that you had where you sold some bulk sales obviously before all of this.
Sure.
When did you consider that as the right option for you?
So for a new development, there is definitely like the weekly or monthly roundtable that the developers have. And once sales hit a certain level of speed, typically, you know, the launch, it's such a great time. Everyone's very excited. The brokers are fresh. Everyone's ready to go. The marketing is done. The PR is on its. And then you get into, for example, we launched a property, 432, a condo project, 432 West 52nd Street. And we were flying, this was October of 2014. At that time, I was still nervous, were we gonna catch the market? Because I thought we were, you know, it's been such a, you know, it was such an overheated market, but it had legs another, you know, 4 or 5 years. But then at the 60 to 65% sold, it just fell off like Q2 2015. That was for me when things started getting pretty tough. Sales were getting a lot slower. We did switch brokerage firms. We did switch the marketing. And then, you know, Amit had mentioned, you know, the $1.50 per square foot that the developer is paying on a smaller boutique property. If, you know, there's scale to it because you still need a full, you know, a full-time doorman, you still need all the staff. So if you don't have 100 units or more, you're actually paying probably $250 a foot. So that's where the boutique guys are feeling more pressure, but they could do something interesting with their marketing. But, you know, the price per foot is actually higher. So we were going through the different scenarios. Should we rent? What can we do? We could rent it for now. However, the minute you put a tenant in that new development, it is no longer a new construction property. So now it's just a used property and it's the resale. That's what, you know, and you lose the allure of a brand new space or a brand new property. So we actually did tests of, we rented out 2 of, I think it was 18 units we had remaining. And we did that just to shore it up. And the response was not, we couldn't even get brand new rental pricing. And this was at this point, 2016, when we really needed to get 75, 85 a foot in order for it to make any sort of capitalization. Because the minute you do that, the strategy then switches to an investment model versus a condo project model. So there's,
and then you guys.
So then we were just like, you know what? We did a inventory loan. We paid off all the debt at 70% sold. We paid off all the debt, and we own the project totally, you know, debt free. But after a year and change of just paying the tax, we were paying for, you know, 30% we were eating away at our profits every single month. And so that's when we said, you know what, let's just dump it.
Chris, I hate to be Adam at this point, but I have a question for you.
Yeah.
What I'm hearing from condo brokers, and maybe you can enlighten me,
sure,
is if you do decide to do rentals, which are in a condo building, the new buyers don't like that if
Correct.
It's more than 10%. And number 2, I'm also hearing that the banks are not willing to lend on buildings which have, let's say, 50-50 rentals and 50% co-op. I mean, condos. Is that true?
There are investor restrictions on condominiums, the amount. So it's really a case by case scenario. And in this case, you would speak to the lender and say, guys, do you want to get paid? Or, you know, this is, you know, the story. All right. You're helping me with the forbearance until, you know, the last day of July. We need to switch gears to survive. So, you know, and before, you know, with vultures, or, you know, Jonathan was mentioning the opportunistic, it's too early. You know, it's definitely too early. I know them, I speak to them. I'm, you know, very well aware of what they're going. But for us, we were at that point, we were just done with the project. We needed to move on. What could we do? And we bulk sold in 2017 when there was still somewhat of a bulk market. when there was still a condo market, and people said it deteriorated. So the condo developers that I speak to, they know very, very well that they've been sort of keeping afloat since 17. This isn't, you know, 18 was not a good year. You know, Stephen mentioned that, you know, 2020 was better than 2019 because 2019 was terrible. and 2018 was terrible.
Well,
so now we're 20% down from 2016. We have all this inventory, and now we're probably 20% below that, you know, so.
So what I wanted to ask, so that's one of the options, like say you're a developer and these are one of the options sort of theoretically kicked around is rental, and you're kind of discussing why that's a problem. Jonathan, can you talk about some of the technical problems of selling or some of the other ways to get out?
Look, at this moment in time, lenders are going to be very practical in terms of what the opportunities are. If there's a noticeable, if even after we immediately get out of COVID, if there's an understanding that sales are not going to resume, but there's an opportunity to rent these markets and really to mitigate your damages, you know, I would say that we're entering a period of what's been done traditionally in the past is probably going to change because of the unique situation that we happen to be in. So to look at past trends, yes, most condo lenders would not permit you converting it to a rental. Yes, there are issues with regard to release prices and refinancing and all of those issues that arise. But remember, the reason that you would convert these units for rental, it's a life-saving mechanism. It's to sustain the debt service on the project. It's to avoid a foreclosure proceeding, you know, and dealing with all the issues that I addressed before. And it's just common sense. But to the extent that you can sell them, even at a discount, to pay off your debt and to sustain it, you know, it's a balancing act. And you're going to have really smart people in Stephen's shop that are going to do an assessment. Does it make sense to sell today, or does it make sense to rent today? And once you balance those out, you know, some projects will say, okay, you know what? We really have so much equity in the project. We can sustain the debt service. It's well worth it for us to sell this even at a discount. And other lenders will say, I don't want to foreclose. I want to work with you. I want you to find, you know, the rental team at Halstead to put these on the market and to rent. And I think each project is going to be.
Is that everyone or?
No, I think you just.
You know, most of the construction loan and the get loan, you have loan documents, and that will, if you don't achieve that release price, the lending community is going to recognize, no, I'm not selling that apartment for $5 million. I'm selling it for $3.5 million. But what do you want me to do? Do you want me to sell it and pay off partial that portion of the mortgage or not? So I think this is going to be the exercise. So I think it's dangerous to give broad strokes as to what in fact is going to happen. And then you're going to read in your publication, Adam, like, wow, this lender did this and this borrower did this, and it's going to make the press, and that might set a new trend for what's going forward. So, you know, you're going to see a lot of creativity and a lot of creativity going into the restructuring to keep deals alive and to avoid, you know, draconian situations.
Yeah. And developers are going to have to be careful as well, as Christopher and Amit started to touch on it earlier. You know, if the developers start renting too many units, then the banks, the end lenders, the mortgage banks might not feel comfortable lending on a sale in that same building if all of a sudden they see a lot of rentals going on. Because when a mortgage bank is looking to finance in a new development, what they want to see is absorption. And they want to see a continued path of absorption. So let's say you're at 40% sold and you got a pre-approval from a bank or a building approval from a bank to that they would lend pre-getting to 50% or higher in your pre-sale. Now, all of a sudden, if you stop that completely and then start renting, and then you do find someone who wants to buy, they might not be able to get end loan financing. So it's a very tricky, very delicate dance you do when you start to make that shift. And what Christopher was referring to earlier was that if investor owns more than 10% of the units in a building, that may also stop a mortgage bank from lending in the building. So there's a lot of intricacies that a developer has to think about before they just make a decision to do a bulk sale or to rent their units.
So
David, I want to ask David something about the process of the very hush-hush way that a developer will try to let it be known that somebody wants to, that they're trying to get out. Can you sort of describe why that happens and how you kind of hear about it?
Sure. I mean, I think that in these cases, they don't want it all over the place. They don't want to interfere with what, Steve and his team are doing, selling the building. So they want to keep it as quiet as possible. They want to go to as small of a number of potential buyers as possible, people who they trust, whether it's a developer directly or someone close to the developer. And, whether it's a bulk sale or it's a recap or any possible, variation of that, they're simply looking for a way to inject liquidity and to de-risk the deal. They might, at the time of the initial conversations, not have had conversations about that with their lender. They want to go to their lender with, a potential deal in place. And they want to do it as quietly as possible so as not to, upset their lender, possibly upset one of their equity partners, and certainly not spook the market.
I think it's a bold move. Oh, wait, Adam, really quickly on that, about the quietness. It's a bold move, but if you have, let's say, 5 condo projects throughout the city and you have 300 apartments you have to move, I would call up Stephen and I would say, this is what I want you to do. And clear it with your investors, clear it with the bank. I would go the completely opposite route. I would say we are auctioning our 40 apartments, and this is the Schedule A. We are going to give everyone a 20% discount, and we will have pre-made contracts signed at the pricing at this level, or just, if there's 30 apartments, have 30 contracts with a rubber stamp, and if they, and literally 5% down, and I would do an auction campaign on a brand new condominium, and give the market 60 days to prepare. I would go the opposite route.
Stephen, do you think you'll see any of that? Is that?
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
You're trying to kill my market, so I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You could hire Amit, Doshi, of course, as well.
So let's not do that, brother. But let's talk about this. I think my approach would be, look, every scenario is different. I'm talking to my partner, Shalini Mehra. I'm talking to David Sheckman, Helen Wong in my office. We literally have 6 or 7 projects right now that are sort of teetering more on the mess side, where the mess guys are unforgiving and they don't want to kick the can down the road. So they're coming to us, and I think we are doing a little different strategy. We're first telling them to go to guys like Jonathan Adelsberg, sit down with them, understand your covenants, understand your debt. Then, yes, you're right. Go to your lender, talk to them. But I think the best pricing you can get, Chris, and Chris, your strategy is not incorrect, but it may be down the road. But I think right now, to get the sweet spot or catch the tail end of the market, you must start with the lender first, start with your attorneys first, start with your debt brokers first to understand how the debt has been structured and put on the property. Then go to a good broker like me, of course, or Meridian.
Then go to Doshi.
And then try. Look, you know what? Honestly, we have lots and lots of people waiting in the wings. And I'm not talking about getting 30, 40, 50% discounts. We have equity investors lined up who want to look at this. We have lenders who want to line up this. We have, look, there are many variations before you go to the auction route. So I love your approach. I agree with you. But I think the time right now, maybe just to catch the tail end of the market and achieve that $100 square foot more, which could work into your promote, which could work into your many different aspects, or just cover your losses.
But Stephen,
yeah, I mean, I think on the auction side, and I think what Chris brings up a good point, but I think the problem with the auction for me is if the auction isn't successful, it really taints the project afterwards. And from what I'm seeing right now, the calls that I'm receiving, direct calls and calls from brokers at both Brown Harris and Halstead, is they're calling me with investors who think that they can buy at 30 and 40% off.
No way.
So, and that's just not happening. So I think if someone were to have an auction in this environment right now, they wouldn't even meet their minimum release prices. And then it could potentially taint the product later. I think maybe in the fall, when things level out and you had a small amount of inventory and you wanted to try to get some activity going, an auction could be a way to do that. Unfortunately, so far in 18 and early 19, when there were some auctions, they weren't really very successful. And I think, like I said, right now, I think the expectation of these investors is there's blood in the water, and there just isn't blood in the water right now. Also, inventory loans have helped developers kick the can down the road for quite some time. And
Sure.
until those inventory loans expire, people are going to hold on with their fingernails.
So I've got a couple questions from people who are listening. So just read this if anyone wants to answer these. At what point do you think we'll see sellers or developers decreasing the cost or decreasing their pricing even further? Do you think there'll be another like bump down or?
I mean, so far, no. I mean, so far, the clients that we've spoken to feel much more comfortable offering some reasonable incentives and concessions than reducing price. As I said, going into 2020, we had already seen a price reduction. And as Chris pointed out, we'd already seen a significant price leveling over the last 12 to 18 months. So I don't, listen, there are a couple of projects, and we all know which ones they are, that have been in trouble for 18 to 24 months. They'll drop their prices because they probably have nowhere to go. But for the majority of developers out there, I don't see price chops across the board. I see more one-off negotiations.
This is another question. There had been a lot of Asian and European buyers coming into here. I think this is either bulk or just as resi buyers. And with that falling off, is that just an additional like problem, or do you think any of them will be coming back?
I mean, I think let's start the baseline. The market was predominantly a local and national market to begin with. 85% of the sales in New York, for the most part, were not foreign investors and buyers. Foreign investors made up 10 to 15% of the market. They're going to be gone for some time. What foreign investors did do is they helped with absorption because they did buy the lower hanging fruit. You know, the foreign investor, for the most part, particularly the Chinese investor, was buying units under $2 million because they were able to get enough cash out to make those deals happen. So I think absorption will be hurt a little bit more than pricing will be from the lack of the foreign investor. I'm much more concerned about the lack of tourism in New York City and its economic impact on the city than I am the foreign investor buying apartments.
Well, just one more point on that. I think it's project specific, because we've spoken in the past about a project which did have an incredibly high amount percent of buyers were overseas buyers. So that was certainly something that, to your point, factored into the absorption on that project specifically more than on some of the other projects we might discuss.
There's a question from Pascal Levy. He said, knowing we're in a low moment of the cycle and a new project will be ready in about 3 years, how are limited partner groups reacting today?
I can answer. It really depends on the sponsor. You have to have very, concise and transparent communications. You want to communicate twice as often as you typically do if you have a quarterly meeting. Now it's, let's chat really quick every single month. We have investors that just, they just want to know that they're safe. And if you're, and that's why you have to have a plan. If your LPs are numerous and small, that's, you treat, them a little bit differently than one LP that's funding your whole project. But really just communicating and having a 6-month or 12 or even 18-month plan. Because if there's uncertainty in when are we going to be back in the office? Adam, when are you back in the office? Everyone else, well, Amit Doshi is a beast. He's there.
I'm in the office.
But when is society coming back? When are we all coming back to the office? And we don't know. So that's the same time frame as when is the market going to be back? When is, so is it 12 months? So what's the 12-month plan? So let's create a 12-month plan starting from June 1. From June to June, what are we going to possibly do, and try to come up with a strategy? And Stephen, about the whole auction thing and being concerned about how if it flops, how is it going to look in 12 months? I don't know, buddy. I don't see it getting much worse. So
well, that's the problem.
I think, and then for Amit Doshi, of course, it depends on the person where you hire Amit, where you hire Team Doshi to be like a little more structured on that, not just a widespread thing. Amit knows, the top 50 guys. Let's keep it a little quieter. Whereas the auction route is a very loud thing, and it's a different. It's B2B
Agreed.
and then B2C.
Agreed.
So it's a different.
Listen,
thing. Yeah.
I have one word. That's one of the reasons I switched my hats. Not that I'm a man of many hats, but I'm telling everybody, relax a little, but work hard towards the goal of achieving something. To the developers, somebody made a point earlier, and I agree. If you're getting 10 to 12% off the pricing now, where do you sign on the dotted line? Let's get this done. Whether you've got a 5% payment down, let's do it. We all know the art of deal making. Listen, Trump is not the only one who wrote the book. We too did it in New York. No questions asked. We need to forge ahead in this market and think of every single avenue to make this happen. But
are there actually any blocks right now? Like, is anyone like quietly marketing, like I'll sell 30 blocks, or is that like always happening quietly?
That's always happening. It's case by case. You go to any developer and be, hey, how much, I'd like to give you an offer on all your units. I'm sure they'll be like, welcome.
Adam,
what can you do?
I mentioned earlier, the discounting is not huge, but
not huge.
Chris is right. You can walk into any developer's office right now and sit down and say, listen, if I take off 30, 40, especially the larger buildings. Yeah. I'm not going to name names, but there are people out there who would love to sell 30, 40. Look, the bottom line is the debt on the property. Yeah. If you really look at the price per square foot, I talked to Maurice Batash at length, and it's $150 a year you're building on between common area maintenance charges. Let's say you only sold 20 units, or 20% of the units, like someone mentioned before. 80% is not sold. Your carrying cost on this 80% of the units is roughly about $150. You can survive that for a year or two, but that's it. You just added $300 to your cost. How are you going to do this now? How are you going to sell in the market in which the rents are coming down? You can't rent it because you're not going to make any money. And number two, you can't even sell the condos because now competition is intense. Everybody's now looking to dump the condos or sell I shouldn't say the word dump. Sell
not dump, sell.
Doshi, don't worry, just dump them. All my condo developers, you know your finances, you know your LPs, you know your banks, talk to everyone, and then choose the least painful approach. I don't know if it gets, maybe it gets worse.
But Amit, or where do you go to look to prospect? Where should people, where do you, in terms of data, are you looking through Pacer or foreclosures or what?
I got to be honest with you. Today's world, I started doing brokerage when Moses and I were doing together, door to door. That's a joke. Nobody got it. That's okay. Let's look at this way.
I got it after you mentioned it.
Oh, by the way, I have a special guest here. Come on in. Helen Wong. Helen, say hi to everybody.
Helen Wang.
Hey there.
Hey, Helen. What happened to 518 Broadway? Just kidding.
There you go. I got Shalini, I got Helen, everybody's in the office. We're working away, guys. Look, there's a lot of ways to do it, but my team, and I got my son involved also in this, my team is sitting here doing day and night research. We look at BuzzBuzz, we look at Zola, we look at Real Estate Finance Bureau, we look at DOB profiles, City Realty, AG filings. I mean, again, this is all broker talk, but we sit there look at the square footage, look at the sellout numbers when they file the plans. Will they be able to achieve the markets? Literally going through all these spreadsheets, we can see potentially, and again, each developer is different. Okay, I'm not saying that this yields the ultimate result, but yes, we can pinpoint to a very certain degree that which projects, if the market deteriorates further, which project could potentially fail.
Do you call those guys up? Do you call them up? And you're
Absolutely, no shame
like right
here.
now, you're calling all those people up?
Speed dial.
And listen, there's a way to call. I'm not doing a Chris kind of thing. Oh, auction it off, you know.
Yeah.
Chris, kidding.
But Amit, I have a question for you. I have a question. So I've been it's been interesting because part of the barometer that I see is I've been obviously placing aside the other portions of my practice dealing with the commercial leasing area. I'm representing a number of schools in the city on various issues. And one of the telling signs has been how everyone's very anxiously awaiting the June 15th day where deposits come in for the next school year.
Yeah.
To see how many people, and some of these are for-profits, some of these are charters, some of these are not-for-profits across the spectrum. But it's particularly telling to see, and they've gotten the PPP loans, but many of, what I think is a real barometer, and I defer to the brokers on this webinar, that the test is going to be of how many deposits come in on June 15th for the next school year. Because you're seeing a lot, even to those of us who have kids in private school in the city, a lot of notifications are going out. If you're asking if your kid's coming back to school in the fall, are you spending the year out in the Hamptons? Wherever there's an alternative place for you to live, many people are considering that option. So in terms of all the analysis that you're doing, how are you sort of factoring in the health issue, the psychological issue? Stephen, that might be more in terms of the barometer you're taking rather than on the investment sales side.
That's a Stephen question.
Yeah, we're taking all these things into consideration. We're also, as I mentioned earlier, we're taking into consideration the quality of life issues that may occur, in certain areas of the city. If, as we said, people are staying home longer and not coming to work, how many restaurants will be open? How many services will be open in your neighborhood? And which neighborhoods might be harder hit? Lower Manhattan's probably going to get hit harder than Upper Manhattan. Brooklyn, I don't think, will be hit as hard as Manhattan because Brooklyn is more of a cottage neighborhood, more of a residential, although it has large business districts. They're not as intertwined with the residential as in Manhattan. So there's a lot of things to consider, and then there's on the resale side of our business, how are co-ops and condos going to operate? Are they going to let us even in the building to show? Are they going to allow us in their elevators? There are so many things, so many factors to consider. And then, what's going to happen with the summer jobs? Are the students going to come? Probably not, and not in the waves that they were. We're looking at the school situation as well, and that's something to consider. And, if we can get information from local municipalities outside of the city, are they seeing school enrollment increase and how much? So we can tell what the real flight factor is.
Well, I'd like to, it's 2:59, so we have to wrap it up right now. I want to thank everyone for attending and for our
Thanks
panel.
for having us.
So just recap: Amit Doshi, David Neveloff, Jonathan Adelsberg, Chris Okada, and Stephen Kliegerman. And thanks so much. Our next panel is going to be on. There's been a recent spike in new development filings in New York City, so we're going to be looking at that. So this will be.
Chris is busy.
Thanks, guys. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Adam. Thank you very much. Thank you, guys.
Nice
You're all
to
great.
meet everybody.
Thanks
Be
so
well.
much.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Good luck, guys.
Keep
Okay.
closing.
Anyone can call me if they've got other questions. Take care.
Keep closing.
Keep closing.
Follow me on Instagram @